People, whites have a higher IQ than blacks and Latinos, so they just do better. There's no racism involved. Same people. Jews have too much power. I did a bit of an accent there, but I don't think I have to ask for any forgiveness or any feelings being hurt out there, being like, oh, no offense intended. No offense was intended. And I think if you do know me, you'll get that. If you don't know me and still catch feelings, you need to do something better in your life, and I don't know you enough to actually be affected by you being offended by what I say, how I say it. But anyway, back to this topic here. So there's something that has been going around as a taboo topic of sorts is IQ, intelligence, people's abilities tied into the actual achievements that they have. And in specific, they've been discussing this bell curve. Now, there's different bell curves of achievements on different things, on different divisions, on dividing on different things, comparing different groups to other groups. It gets some of its most testy times or problematic situations that race in this is when you're talking about the correlation between racial IQ and racial achievement. Before I get into the specifics of this particular thought here, let me just talk a bit about this topic. I think different bodies have different capabilities. There's not too much of a disagreement that it turns out to be that certain people from certain places seem to be more physically gifted at certain sports due to their physical bodies, and then you tie in certain cultural things, like you'll turn out there's some people in certain places of the United States of America that when you look at the actual certain sports that they play, when you're talking about something like American football, they happen to be certain athletes that come out from certain areas that also happen to have weather and climate where these kids might have been outside running all around the year that select for a different sort of body type. If you had the ability to be that, chances are if you're running outside for 12 months out of the year versus 6 months out of the year, and all the 6 months you're inside the house sitting there probably gaining weight and just being more sedentary, chances are you're going to have different body types if you had the ability. So there are things in there that people find to be not that problematic. They're like, yeah, that makes sense. I can see that. But when you insert intelligence into this, IQ, all of a sudden it's very problematic. Then when you bring in something like the bell curve, now you're dividing up groups and you're making comparisons of how people achieve in different society. And it's been shown to say, like in some of these tests that I've seen, that and large, when they test blacks in the United States of America, Latinos in the United States of America, Asians in the United States of America, Jews, whites, it seems to have a different IQ spread. Now, as I mentioned before, there are cultural things that I think affect this. Your brain is a physical part of your body, but how well you use it is different. There are certain things that are tied into our genes. If you take two twins and one of them is raised in a happy environment, is fed well, is exercised well, they're going to grow to a certain height. They could grow to like 6'2". And then you take another twin, you take that other twin, and they're in an abusive relationship. They're undernourished. They're not actually cared for and cherished. You could find that this kid with pretty much the same genetics as his identical twin ends up only getting to about 5'7", 5'6". This actually does happen. And this is not even talking about any potential injuries that the child might have during that time. For example, the kid who's actually living in a positive environment might have broken his bones when he was a kid, broken both his legs and cracked maybe the growth plates, and then that just limited his height. So there's different things that go into this. There's nature and then there's nurture when this is involved. Certain communities, certain cultures and societies, I think part of their lower IQs will be tied into the adverse childhood experiences that some of them have. That also has been shown to drop potential points, however they actually want to measure this. The potentiality that somebody has is going to be dropped by them being abused as a kid. And another issue when you come to the United States of America is mixing different groups. Is it like and like, as I said, with the culture and the nurture that comes into there? When you get into an environment where you're talking about these minorities in the United States of America, you're covering those IQs. How many of them are recent migrants from different cultures and different societies and different countries that might have different diets and different childhood practices that are going to affect the actual displayed or achieved IQ versus their actual physical limitations of their actual brain of not being able to actually reach to a certain point. And then again, I would rather take somebody of IQ like 90 who is a peaceful and well adjusted human being than somebody who has the base IQ of like 150 but was abused and has all these issues. There's different things to actually look into actually why somebody achieves a certain thing. And I do think whatever you want to call it, intelligence, however you want to measure it, does actually play a part in deciding this. So now that I have that out of the way, back to the thought to finish this up. Why I came to this thought was specifically they talk about this in the Salt Right. Some people I have heard specifically talk about this point, how there is no racism. Black people shouldn't complain so much about this. Minorities complain too much about their achievements and things like this because look at the IQ. These people just achieve more. That's why there's more white people earning more than these other people. That's why there's more white people in positions of power. But using that same IQ, the same people who say this, some of the same people will say this, will then say there is some sort of Jewish question. There is some sort of conspiracy by Jews. That's why so many Jewish people are in certain fields, controlling Hollywood, controlling positions of power, even though they have such a small percentage of the population. Look at all these Jews in all these places doing all these things, all these machinations, holding the white people down, devising all these plans. But no, when you look at those same IQ things, Ashkenazi Jews in particular have the highest IQs. And even when you break down the IQ situation, they normally score higher in verbal IQ, in certain IQs that also correlate to these certain fields of power. When you're talking about media, when you're talking about entertainment, when you're talking about communications, when you're talking about even politics. Politics is about the possible, it's about talking to people, it's about projecting things, about telling narratives. When it comes to that, if you are more achieving in that field, there is a chance you're going to be higher in that. So they use the same statistics to say, or the same data, or the same information, the same IQ tests to say that's why blacks and Latinos don't achieve as much. And then they turn around and completely forget it when they're talking about Jews. But another thing they forget here is when they're talking about Asians, and they hardly talk about the Asians, and they're mixing Asians with like the Indians and the actual Southeastern Asians, that's the Chinese, the South Koreans, and the Japanese. And there is something that goes into here, and again, I'm talking about with the actual culture and the actual definitions and the nurture over the nature aspect of this. If you were testing people in the United States of America, and in these minority groups, it has a higher percentage of people who are recent migrants, then it's not an apples to apples necessarily comparison here. Because you look at the average IQ of India compared to the average IQ of the United States of America, even just whites United States of America, and in India it's lower. But then you look at the Indians community in the United States of America, and I think you'll find that it's higher. At least for sure, the average Indian American seems to earn a lot more than your average white family. Now, why is this? I think this could be part of that whole brain drain thing. I don't believe in the term brain drain itself, the thing, oh, it's some negative thing people going by. Yes, there's some negatives in the incentives and the state systems and the migration, but this might be personal bias as well as someone who's traveled, someone who likes immigrating and migrating to different places. I can't really hold it against somebody if they think they can do better in another location and decide to move to that location under the laws available. When it's illegal, I have issues with that. But anyway, what I was trying to get at here was certain people in India look at the environment in India and say, I don't think I can achieve as much here. I think I can have a better quality of life if I go to the United States of America. And then they go there, and then that might be some of the higher IQ people. So in part, you are shaving off some of the top IQ people in a certain country who are able to think and find ways to actually move to an entirely new location, learn new cultures, adjust to certain things, possibly new languages, just have the right mentality and capability and mindset to be able to adjust to whatever adjustments one needs to make when they travel to another location. Like maybe if you found a way to test the average IQ of Americans who have moved and live in other countries versus the average IQ of Americans who stay in the United States of America, I think you will find that the average IQ of Americans that have left is somewhat higher than the ones who stay in. Now, on the inverse, there is also the aspect of people coming from different cultures. As I mentioned with the adverse childhoods, some of these minority groups are going to come from countries where child abuse is a lot more prevalent than it is in the United States of America, which could end up drawing down the actual average numbers of these communities. So that's it for now. Just one more interesting thing about part of this, why the Ashkenazi Jews were supposed to... I just find this to be an interesting thing, just about a selection thing that happened relatively recently, was with all the persecution that the Jews went through, especially the Ashkenazi Jews in Europe and different places in the world. resulted in them being a very insular community. And then supposedly some of them took certain jobs where they couldn't own certain things, so they had to remember certain things in certain ways, they had to be middlemen. So moving around different places, understanding how things are moving around, the current system that we live in of these connecting things to other things and communicating these things to these other things, being aware of the certain dispositions of certain people and these other people and finding ways to mix it together, those pressures actually help them select for certain things, certain mentalities, certain predispositions. And then it even goes further to just how in certain cultures, in Christian cultures, some of the most scholarly people would actually go into the priesthood and they would also have the celibacy tied in there. Yet you'd have the inverse, where in the Jewish communities, some of the most scholarly people would go into being rabbis, but they would be encouraged to have wives and have as many kids as they wanted, and then that would actually spread on those genes. So there are things that go into these things. All I was trying to get at with this thought was, if you're going to say one thing is the reason certain groups don't actually achieve well, and then another group in that same thing seems to achieve higher points or higher scores than your group, and then you don't apply that to that also being the reason that that group also is achieving better, that's just hypocritical. So let me know what you think. Like if you liked what I was saying, dislike if you dislike it. There's links below to our merchandise store. Subscribe on whatever platform that you listen to this on. I appreciate you taking your time to listen. Till next time, goodbye.